Hey guys, tonight we're time travelling back to the Middle Ages, that lovely era when folks thought bathing was a crime against humanity, and the best medical advice was just pray harder. We're diving into the bizarre and often hilarious attempts people made to cure the plague. Forget what we learned in school. There's no witch hunts, just a delightful mix of ignorance and creativity. So before you snuggle down beneath your clean sheets, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you honestly enjoy this mess. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm keen to know just how many of you might be bourbon drunk and half asleep right now. Now, dim those lights, and if you can, turn on a fan for that gentle background noise resembling a suspicious breeze. Get comfortable, mayhaps grab your medieval blanket or the nearest throw pillow, and let's get ready to explore some ludicrous medieval questions. Ever wondered whether your doctor gave you leeches as a form of currency? Did people really think bathing might literally let your soul escape? What compelled someone to rub their armpits with the blood of a goat? Would you trust a barber surgeon more than your family doctor? Or are you just in denial? Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1347, with a mouthful of gruel and a neighbour sneezing copiously. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, there's a high chance of plague. You awaken to the sound of a rooster declaring that it's morning, or possibly a nearby peasant who's taken up crowing as a side hustle. Your straw bed reminds you that it's served more as a rat motel than a mattress. Congratulations, this is your life now. You stretch, but your joints protest like a cranky old man in a tavern. The floor beneath you feels suspiciously damp, not from a recent rain, but perhaps from a late-night mishap involving that chicken that liked you just a bit too much yesterday. As you sit up, you take stock of your surroundings. This isn't exactly a 5-star hotel. In fact, it's not even a 1-star. It's a small wooden hut, more reminiscent of a barn than a cosy home, with that charming open floor plan where you share the space with your family, livestock, and a delightful assortment of fleas. Take a deep breath. Smell that? It's a unique blend of stale beer, farm animal aromas, and that lingering scent of yesterday's potato peels that you're pretty certain your neighbour's goat is still chewing on. Ah, the fragrance of the Middle Ages. You slowly push yourself off the bed, or should I say, the nest of bugs. You have two options for getting out of bed. Option 1, you can risk stepping directly on a rat. Option 2, try very carefully to avoid any unknown and hazardous squishy substances on the floor, which to be fair may have been your sister's breakfast from 2 days ago. You methodically choose option 3, hovering slightly and doing a bizarre dance of balancing until you finally make it to solid ground. Welcome to the morning routine of a medieval peasant. Trekking outside, you find the morning air crisp like your ex's heart. It's full of hope and dread as well as the scent of, wait for it, last night's communal waste. Yes, that delightful, flavourful mixture of animal dung and whatever they could scrape off their boots. Forget hand sanitizers, they didn't even know what soap was. A hazmat suit would serve you better than a tunic right about now. Now, let's talk about your home base. A wooden structure with walls so thin you can hear your neighbour arguing about the cheese they accidentally dropped on the floor. The design is a marvel, and by marvel I mean it has leaks and holes, just enough to let the morning breeze come in and bring you chills. Forget central heating. Your family's body heat is the best option available, and that's not saying much when you consider how many of them are snuggled up in the same bed, or on top of you. As you shuffle toward the kitchen area, you might notice the odd ceremony of your family preparing for breakfast. Let me tell you, it's less about gourmet options and more about who can pick the least harmful thing from last week's leftovers. You know those "what's that smell" moments? This is it. You brace yourself for pottage, which is essentially a thick stew of whatever can be coerced from the land. Sometimes it's made from a few stray vegetables, other times it's creatively upgraded with the remains of an ancestor's wedding soup, and possibly that rat from last night. Nothing says nutritious like a cobbled together pile of questionable ingredients. With breakfast barely held down, it's off to work, which is a euphemism for working yourself into an early grave. Grab your wooden hoe and let's head out to the fields. No coffee break for you. It's sunrise to sundown. The sun is not there to make you feel warm and fuzzy. Rather, it's turning the fields into a volcanic oven while you shovel away dirt as if you were digging your own grave. Every step you take is accompanied by a chorus of your joints cracking and protesting louder than your most obstinate chicken. As you bend over to plough the ground, pondering what you did to deserve this fate, of course, there's a nagging thought that crosses your mind. Is this really any better than going back to bed? The answer will always be buried under the 3-foot pile of weeds stinging at a rate faster than a peasant's gossip. There's no time for those thoughts. Just remember, when life gives you dirt, throw it back in its face and keep digging. So here you are, facing another day in the enchanting Middle Ages, where the sun beats down, the air stinks of everything you wish you could forget, and your back is already ready to join the rat party on that filthy straw bed. Yes, this is your life. But hey, at least you know you're not alone. After all, misery loves company, and what better company than that of the great plagues and pestilence lurking ominously on the horizon? Stick around, it only gets weirder from here. Let's chat about breakfast. If you're expecting eggs and bacon, you haven't grasped the gravity of your situation. Your breakfast is a bowl of gruel that looks suspiciously like yesterday's soup. You wouldn't feed this to your neighbour's chicken. This unappetizing mixture is a concoction of whatever grain was left over, boiled in water until it reaches a texture akin to wallpaper paste. Congratulations, you're now an expert at eating meals that defy all expectations, not for their deliciousness, but for the impromptu chemistry behind them. Despite the unfortunate culinary choices, you take a seat on a wobbly 3-legged stool. Yes, you're one oops away from a faceplant for a breakfast party of one, but at least the rats aren't judging. You muster the strength of a medieval knight readying for battle, lifting your spoon like a sword. The smell? Well, think stale hay mixed with regret. It's like someone dumped last week's turnips into the pot and said, "Now this is gourmet." But you dig in anyway because not eating means cranky tummy and more work in the fields. After filling up on this medieval masterpiece, a stark reality settles in. Nature has called and it's not being polite. You remember the joy of reliving this adventure you only dive into after breakfast. Ah, yes. How could you forget the charming ritual of relieving oneself? With no magical toilet to whisk away your mess, you find your closest option. A wooden bucket left behind the hut like an exclusive VIP lounge for unfortunate disposal. Is it full? It appears Uncle Wolf Stan had a spicy bowl of something he shouldn't have eaten last night. You hold your breath and toss your contributions to the pile, embracing your very own version of medieval Deliveroo. You shout "Gardy-loo" out the window, a phrase that sounds almost fancy but is little more than an ancient heads-up for anyone foolish enough to walk beneath a window. The street smells like your morning gruel, just with added flair. Dogs dart away, children cough, and some chickens pause mid-peck as they contemplate existential decisions about their own life choices. Now, feeling remarkably lightheaded after your previous coin toss with destiny, it's time to delve into another pressing matter: personal hygiene, or the distinct lack thereof. Bathing is a crime against humanity in this era. In fact, the last time you dipped a toe in actual water was back in February, and who could blame you? Bathing would only open your pores to the diseases the church warned you about. The last thing you want is to be labelled as a disease magnet. So instead, you embrace the art of smelliness, something that's going to become an unusual badge of honour. Dressed in your wool tunic, which smells like your last 3 recipes gone wrong, you prepare to step into the day like the fashion icon you are, or could be, if you squint really hard. There's just one outfit, and its style is tragic, drab, mixed with whatever was cheapest. Not to mention your lovely smell blends a unique bouquet of hay, sweat, and a hint of something that may have last been alive several weeks ago. But here comes the kicker, trying to pick out the perfect footwear. You might as well be choosing a mystical talisman in a fairy tale because your shoes, if you own any, are made of badly stitched leather that sag to the ground. Most peasants opt for going barefoot, embracing a more natural connection to the elements, which in this case means stepping in mud mixed with, well, let's call it yesterday's business. As you navigate the village, you can almost hear the collective groans from other poor souls dealing with their morning routines. You exchange nods with a fellow peasant, both of you aware that today's struggle could very well end with sore backs and hunger pangs that make the gruel seem like a 4-star meal at the finest noble's banquet. At last, you muster the strength to step outside. Bright sunlight hits you like a slap, and you're reminded that while your morning was a mix of festering sorrows and plagues of culinary creativity, life pushes on, especially when you owe your lord a bountiful harvest, which frankly seems impossible given the state of everything. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, a seasoned pro at evening the score of your life with whatever's at hand, and take your first steps into the day's madness. Just remember, breakfast may not have been a lavish feast, but hey, at least you're alive, surrounded by gruel and the promise of another adventure, or at least until lunch rolls around. After breakfast, nature's calling, and it's not just whispering sweet nothings. You're about to embark on a quest to find a suitable place to do your business. You can't even call this an adventure, it's more like a medieval rite of passage. Picture yourself in 14th century Europe. It's a perilous journey involving questionable timing and zero privacy. Familiar with the phrase, "when nature calls"? Well, in your case, it's more like, when nature screams with unholy rage. You eye the wooden bucket sitting in the corner, which has resigned itself to being the designated restroom. It's brimming with the added aroma of your Uncle Bertram's last evening meal. As you consider this option, you quickly dismiss it, because who wants to cross swords with the potent smell of expired turnips on a fine morning? Instead, you decide to seek out the more humane outside option, the Privy. But here's the thing, there's no soothing sign indicating restroom this way. Getting there is like navigating a labyrinth of mud, livestock and unsuspecting farm equipment that seems intent on ensuring you have a very messy trip. You risk stepping in something that deeply resembles what your neighbour's goat left behind, and you swear it just winked at you. Once you finally arrive at your destination, a wooden stall with a hole cut into it above a deep pit, you sigh in relief. Because let's be honest, anything is better than using the bucket. But just when you think you're safe, you remember the distinct lack of, well, privacy. It's less of a throne room and more of a social club where chit-chat might involve discussing the weather, livestock and sharing hearsay about the latest unfortunate soul to catch the plague. As you hover awkwardly over the gaping hole, sorry about the visual, you can't help but wonder if this is what your life has come to. But it's too late to back out now. You unleash nature's call, and as you do, you can't help but notice the local gossip spins its way up to the top of the priorities to talk about at the market list. Finishing up, you think about your friends, no, your neighbours, and their tales of toilet tragedies. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Did old Mrs. Tilly really scream last week because she slipped on a mud puddle right outside the Privy? Yes, she did. You shuffle back into the village, part of you low-key proud of surviving that rite of passage ordeal unscathed. You remind yourself that everyone has to go through these trials, and maybe that makes enduring them somewhat field-documented, a peasant memoir of sorts. But alas, the ultimate humiliation happens as you're leaving. A sudden sneeze erupts from the field nearby. It seems even the local livestock has a death wish. A surprised chicken darts away, squawking as if the end of the world had arrived. In a moment of unexpected panic, your instincts kick in. The journey back through the village becomes a hobble of speed mimicry only a bad racehorse would emulate. You bolt back in a peculiar gait, dodging half a dozen equally bewildered cows along the way. As you return, triumphantly hoping no one noticed, you accidentally lock eyes with a neighbour who gives you a knowing smirk. Ugh, the shame. Now that you've had your taste of medieval bathroom bliss, let's veer into another source of societal dismay: food. The culinary landscape of peasant life isn't as glamorous as some would hope, and I guarantee the meal that awaits you isn't likely to improve your gastronomic reputation. So, here we are, preparing to feast on the next grim chapter of our medieval lives. Food preservation is questionable. Cooking techniques are mostly trial and error, and vegetables have been known to take on a personality of their own. Get ready to grapple with what poverty-laden creativity looks like against the backdrop of a kitchen that might just be a shrine to various forms of botulism. So sit tight, because just as the Privy journey will stick with you, this meal may haunt your dreams. Who thought relief could be this complicated? Not you, and certainly not your fellow villagers, who you now realise are all in this delightful chaos with you. Welcome to peasant life, where every trip to the restroom is a battle for dignity. Bathing. The medieval folks believed that scrubbing your skin could open your pores and let in disease like you were some kind of sponge. If you think about washing now, you might catch a glimpse of historical madness. Everyone knew dirt was good for the soul. After all, how else could you secure a solid social status if your body was clean? In medieval Europe, cleanliness was equated with a death wish. You might even be labelled a witch if you dared to scrub yourself, and let's be honest, nobody wanted to be burned at the stake over a bar of soap. So there you are, standing in a hovel with your family and their questionable hygiene habits, surrounded by layers of dirt and the scents of damp straw, unkempt livestock, and the ever-present echo of something that might just be your cousin's last meal. Instead of thinking about taking a nice hot bath, your only option is to stay layered in grime and hope that the local flies choose someone else as their brunch. Bathing was reserved for the rich and celebrated with as much fanfare as a royal gala. The dusty peasant could only watch as nobles frolicked in endless streams of scented water, while they were left behind trying to survive their next meal. But fear not, the medieval mind was as inventive as it was misguided. Instead of bathing, you could engage in a process known as dry bathing. This glorious practice involved covering your body in fragrant herbs or oils, which served a dual purpose: staving off the smell and deterring pests. Essentially, a medieval spa day, if your idea of a spa day is rubbing yourself with whatever fresh crop of weeds you could find. Lavender had its moment as the go-to option, but let's be honest, no amount of time can mask that fermented goat odour wafting from the corner. As for public baths, forget it. Communal bathing quickly developed into a combination of gossip, ritual, and more flesh-eating bacteria than you might achieve by just rolling in a mud pit. Here, you could scrub shoulders with your neighbours, socialise and soak up some real medieval style, rumoured to be the place not just for cleansing, but for scandalous tete-a-tetes that would leave your dignity desperately scrambling for the nearest exit. But with all this great work up in the air about cleanness, what about those hilarious gargantuan wooden tubs? The local ones that looked more like they'd been salvaged from the remains of a shipwreck than designed for soaking. Yes, those. The kind where you might find your friend Kenneth, face first with a floating rat. Looks like he was attempting to drown his dirtiness, but instead kicked off a whole new adventure. Oh, and speaking of dramatic experiences, nobody used shampoo, unless you count whatever herbal concoctions were whipped up in the moment. A little rosemary here, a dash of crushed garlic there. Everything bound to leave your hair smelling nothing short of a medieval stew. Meanwhile, nobles had their own bathtub fantasy. Imagine for a second an extravagant ornate drain and a big fig leaf serving as a privacy shield. Of course, it was all a set-up for the gossip mill. Did you hear Lady Elizabeth went for a dip yesterday? That tub was practically a public affair, said another noblewoman, while clutching her own fig leaf like a crucial piece of armour. As the centuries rolled forward, society slowly began to realise that perhaps this medieval aversion to bathing was a bit extreme. Doctors finally suggested that, gasp, washing might actually be good for you. And so, the cautious shift towards cleanliness began, but not before several plague-riddled centuries had rendered people more willing to afford lice than soap. By the time you finally make it back to modernity and slip into your delightful hot shower, remember that this miracle of modernity is made possible by a long winding road of questionable hygiene, wildly absurd customs, and a collective dedication to filthy charm. So the next time you lather up, spare a thought, and maybe a chuckle, for your medieval brethren who would have thought you were a sorcerer just for using shampoo. Suddenly, every bubble feels less like a treat and more like a royal decree. Just don't mistake it for an airborne plague, and you'll be all right. Now let's discuss what you're wearing, or rather what your one outfit consists of. You've got your wool tunic that feels like a hug from a rabid raccoon, and pants that haven't seen soap since the last great flood. In fact, that tunic is practically a bacteria science project. You could probably name the microorganisms living in it by now. The cut is, shall we say, rustic, considered high fashion in the 1300s, but by today's standards, it would be a selection for a costume party featuring frugal medieval peasant. You squint at the reflectiveness of your muddied, poorly woven attire and marvel. How is it that a fabric meant to provide warmth can simultaneously serve as a detailed map of your last 5 meals? Each thread, a testimony to your struggles with pottage, barnyard mishaps, and the odd bit of chicken dung you were naturally forced to step in as part of your daily choreography. It's all part of the authentic medieval experience. So you've likely got a few colours happening here. Earthy browns mixed in with vague hints of green from where you sat on grass soaking wet with dew. The very finest in Ode Farmyard. Perfect for the noble meeting of dung aficionados. Let's not forget about your pants. If pants is even what you would dare call them. They resemble oversized sacks with more holes than fabric, actively contributing to your general discomfort. You've heard tell of the luxury of wearing breeches, and oh, how you long for a pair. Instead, you've got these ragged remnants clinging to your legs that seem to be more of a fashion accident than a choice. Your footgear, a marvel of medieval craftsmanship, or maybe it was simply crafted to punish your toes for crimes committed in the previous life. Congratulations. You're a proud owner of shoes made from untanned leather, definitely questionable about whether they should return to a cow at any moment. In this mystical realm of fashion, the one thing you can rely on is that cleanliness is indeed next to godliness, which is, ironically, why no one here seems to care about personal hygiene. One whiff of your attire and you'll understand why there are no scented candles as you stare into the village mirror, which is just a puddle of water on a plank. Style schmile. It's all about survival, baby. Laundering clothes? That's for the rich. You're more concerned about dodging rats and hopeful that you don't trip on the lumpy floor. Now, if today's outfit isn't quite doing it for you, let me introduce you to the wonders of accessories, or lack thereof. You won't find that gleaming jewellery or a fabulous handbag here. No. Peasant chic means a string of twine you yanked from the barn to keep your tunic from falling off, because loose clothing is dangerous around sharp objects like pitchforks. Perhaps your only accessory is a pair of rusty scissors that could double as a medieval torture device, a reminder that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, or an acknowledgement of crushing poverty. You do occasionally see some wannabe fashionista attempting to make a statement with hideous patchwork or odd embroideries, but let me tell you, they're simply hoping to cover a giant hole in their clothing. And one could argue it takes a certain bravery to wear someone else's fabric scraps as a badge of honour. That's one way to boast about your artisanal craft without ever having learned a single stitch. As with most things medieval, everything from your shirt to your cap is subject to the whims of the seasons and the Lord's harvest. In winter, you can bet your sagging pants that you'll be colder than a snowman in a freezer, and in summer, you'll prance around like a walking potato. The clothes you wear today are only a temporary covering. They'll soon be replaced by whatever hodgepodge outfit your neighbour has decided to donate after his tunic finally augmented into retirement. So, let me just stop and appreciate the sheer absurdity of your daily fashion dilemmas. You've managed to wake every day wearing something that was uniquely unflattering, unclean, and probably a common ground for insects. But hey, as the saying goes, fashion is temporary, but medieval misery is forever. Just remember, your vibrant and illustrious wardrobe of wool will serve you well as both armour and humiliation, until the next plague decides to take the town down a peg or two. After all, in this medieval nightmare of existence, if you can slip into something warmer, you might just make it through another day without further embarrassment, or worse, becoming the next fashionable victim of a pitchfork duel over a half-rationed loaf of bread. So here's to your resilience, baggy pants, and that questionable tunic that once proudly belonged to your great-grandfather before it mutated into the fabric that haunts your closet today. Spoiler alert, you're not wearing any. Most people in the Middle Ages considered underwear a fancy idea. This means your current situation is not only uncomfortable, it's also an ongoing social experiment in odour. You wake up each morning, and your day kicks off with a brisk round of introspection about poor life choices, starting from your decision not to invest in something as basic as pants. Instead, you're draped in your wool tunic, or as we like to call it, the medieval version of a bathrobe that's seen more battles with dirt than a knight in full armour. Every time you move, your tunic clings to your skin with the ferocity of a rabid squirrel, generating an ensemble more reminiscent of a swamp creature than a member of polite society. The fabric scratches at your skin, as if it's trying to remind you that you're not quite meant for this era. And with every shuffle, you broadly multiply the aromas of hay, sweat, and whatever foul dishes you could barely choke down just hours before. It's delightful, really. Just when you thought you were immune to embarrassment, you've managed to become your own olfactory incident report. Now, let's rewind and talk about what the common people considered fashionable back then. It was more about functionality than style. When it came to clothing, the Middle Ages operated on a strict wear it until you can see through it policy. With no undergarments, your tunic served as a singular barrier between your dignity and the ever-judging eyes of the populace. This is where the art of ventilation comes into play. You'd want to move gracefully so as to avoid turning your belly into a walking laundry basket. And think about laundry for a moment. We live in a miraculous time where we can toss our garments in the wash. But back then? Ha! You mean to tell me you're supposed to haul water from the nearest source, boil it on the hearth, and scrub out months of accumulated smells? Who in their right mind would gear up for that marathon, unless they were training for some kind of medieval endurance event? Spoiler, laundry was a long-lost sport. As you navigate social gatherings, the absence of underwear takes the form of wax judgment from others. Look at that man, So brazen in his lack of modesty, they murmur, slightly jealous that they too have perhaps skipped the fresh layer. At the tavern, your trousers might be your shameful secret, and don't even think about sitting too close to your peers. You wouldn't want to give them the wrong impression. However, a curious sense of solidarity emerges from this bizarre situation. It's comforting to know that most of your fellow peasants are also skirting the line of decency. Most of them are cluelessly shuffling around with a certain biennial who needs underwear swagger, doing their best to pretend their garb doesn't smell like a week-old goat. You'll bond over shared torment, trading stories about your itchiness while secretly mourning the absence of some glorious cotton. Ah, but let's not forget the noblemen. You may think they're living in the lap of luxury, but they too tend to forget the delights of personal hygiene. While they might sport silk tunics and a belt of leather that looks more expensive than anything you own, the truth is their inner garments probably haven't seen soap since the last full moon. You know the ones, draping their heavily embroidered tunics and trying to project an air of sophistication. Spoiler, they smell just as awful as you do. Finally, returning home after a long day of pretending not to care how much your tunic clings and breaths funky odours brings you back to the reality of your choice of daily attire. You collapse onto your haystack of a mattress, sweaty, miserable and exhausted. Yet as you drift into a restless sleep filled with dreams of stretchy fabrics and mysterious magic underwear that doesn't chafe, you realise that life in the Middle Ages is somewhat of a level playing field. No one really knows what they're doing, but at least you're all in this unsanitised adventure together. Isn't that comforting in its own medieval way? And as you drift off into slumber, you can't help but think how grateful you'll be for indoor plumbing, operas about tragic romances, and a time when decent fabric truly became a universal priority, even if that meant embarrassing your ancestors along the way. You've had a rough night with a migraine that could fell a horse. Who do you turn to? The town barber surgeon. He's got a sharp blade and questionable hygiene. What more do you need? When it comes to medicine in the Middle Ages, the notion of healthcare is like a fictional tale told by a drunken bard around a flickering fire. Half true, mostly absurd and always tinged with a hint of horror. Your barber surgeon might also be moonlighting as the local hairdresser, and if that doesn't instill confidence, nothing will. As you drag yourself through your crooked wooden door, you notice that there's an odd sense of camaraderie among the townsfolk who visit him. Everyone's been here at least once. They grumble about the line, but when you share stories of your malady, the laughter echoes painfully in your skull. Ah, you're new to the migraine club, eh? Consider yourself initiated. Fun times ahead. It's like joining an exclusive group of misfits, but with none of the perks, like actual relief. You finally reach the barber surgeon's door, emblazoned with a sign that adorns the dreary exterior, a red and white striped pole. It's a welcoming sight, as long as you ignore the fact that the only thing lower than his medical license is probably the refuse pile behind his hut. Never mind the lack of qualifications. In a world where the average life expectancy is akin to that of a hamster, you can't afford to be picky. Inside, a curious scene unfolds. The barber surgeon is deep into a friendly conversation with a fellow villager who's been recently bloodlet for what's probably the third time this week. He has a bandage around his bicep and shows off his best bravery smile, which looks a lot like he just swallowed a sour lemon. You should try the leeches, mate. They work wonders for everything. Well, at least for making you feel lighter. He chuckles and winces at the same time. Whatever you have, he assures you, can be solved with one of three things: bloodletting, leeches, or a herb that smells suspiciously like hay and is probably more effective for treating your neighbour's chickens than your human ailments. How about I take a pint from you? It creates room for your spirit. Besides, you won't need it in the afterlife, he jests, grinning like a man with a hidden treasure chest. Your head hurts too much to engage in that philosophical debate, so you nod and lie back, bracing yourself for what's about to come. You can smell something, an aroma that blends musty wool, stale ale, and the unmistakable scent of unwashed bodies. Ah, the ambience of middle-aged medical practices. You see jars on a shelf beside you filled with various bits and bobs that can only be described as mysterious. There's a rat skittering across the floor, likely looking for a better gig than being part of this merry institution. In this moment, you think about how, in this world, a dermatologist is a myth, and feeling better often means letting the blood flow for both you and the rat. With shaky hands, the barber surgeon hoists your arm, a slick knife gleaming in his grasp like it's seen things no instrument should witness. Nothing like a good bleed. Trust me, this will make you feel like a new person, or at least an old one with a lighter purse. You might wish to protest, but your migraine is doing a superb job of making you reconsider life choices. All right, but if I don't wake up, at least tell them it was worth the risk. Amidst the chaos of this medieval miracle, you meet the other local patrons of this peculiar clinic, all trying to avoid losing their heads or any other limbs in the process. One fellow is in for a little problem with his ankle, which evidently qualifies him for a full foot amputation since, better safe than sorry. A woman nearby, a bit too cheerfully rambunctious post-bloodletting, proclaims that she feels so light, prompting you to contemplate whether she's more playful or delirious. Eventually, once you're feeling sufficiently woozy, the barber surgeon declares it done. You leave in a daze, wondering if migraine was the real problem, or if you've just successfully traded it for a fresh set of uncertainties. Your fate is sealed. You're now part of a club you never signed up for, where the motto is, "You'll be fine, as long as you survive the treatment." Now, armed with a slight headache and a deeply hollow wallet, you can't help but chuckle. Life in this ridiculous age might be grim, but by golly it's never boring. Bloodletting is one of the hot new trends, and being a chic peasant you have to get in on it. Sure, you'll feel weak, woozy and lightheaded, but at least you'll have a compelling story to tell at the next market. Just imagine, you, sitting at the tavern, regaling your buddies with tales of how you survived a bloodletting session with nothing more than a crooked smile and just enough ale to make the whole experience bearable. Oh, did I mention I was a little nauseous? Yeah, but that's just the leeches doing their job. Welcome to the cutting-edge world of medieval medicine, where your local barber or physician doubles as a barber surgeon. Yes, that's right. Instead of focusing solely on your hair, they also specialise in the fine art of poking holes in your skin. It's like multitasking at its most extreme. Imagine walking into the establishment. You might see a few guys getting their beards trimmed while others are passed out on the floor, blood seeping from their arms like it was just another Tuesday. "Alright, sit down, friend," the barber says with the casual demeanour of someone who just prepared to flip your burger at a fast food place. "Today's procedure will be less styling and more, let's remove some of that pesky blood. Why bother with an anaesthetic when you can go for the thrill of sheer panic?" You can almost hear the soothing sounds of hammers and sickles are dinging in the background as he readies his tools. The leeches are kept in a glass jar on the countertop, looking mildly offended by their working conditions. And who can blame them? Surely they expected a more refined lifestyle, not the existence of being thrust upon someone's open wound with no explanation. Once you've signed the medieval equivalent of a consent form, a simple nod will do, it's time to prepare for the procedure. The barber retrieves a leech, hanging it delicately between his fingers as if it were the latest fashion accessory, rather than a blood-sucking parasite that's about to feast on your living essence. You're introduced to this living vacuum cleaner, and your stomach begins to rebel at the thought. "Now try to relax," he says, a little too cheerful for your current predicament. Just think of it as a diligent pest control service. You can't help but wonder if anyone's thought to mail the Leech a W-2 form at the end of the year, since they seem to have a side job in blood summoning. The moment the Leech is placed on your arm, it wiggles like it's auditioning for the next big dance number. You brush away the urge to scream as it grips your skin and begins its work. The ultimate parasitic dinner party is in full swing, and you, dear friend, are the buffet. Within moments, your arm feels dizzy, as if you've just spun around in circles for a good 5 minutes. Is that lightheadedness a sign that it's working, or a signal for you to seek immediate help? Who really knows? It's hard to focus on those intricate thoughts when your blood is steadily being drained, and while everyone else is clamouring for runs in the family or fevers from bad water, you have an exclusive glimpse into tickle-based bloodletting therapy that could become the next big trend. You should have seen how I felt. It's the new restorative practice. You would tell anyone who's about to roll their eyes at your enthusiasm for leeches. Soon enough, thankfully, the leech falls away, plump and sated like a cat who just got into the cream. You're relieved. Not because you feel amazing, but because you're one step closer to your next glowing review of medieval surgery. You believe you can feel the dull ache of the leech's work settling in, but you also have your limited medieval knowledge to assure you it's worth it. After all, they say you have to suffer for beauty, or in this case, life. So now, with a few leech scars adorning your poor arm and an experience that could make your tedious life just a tad more exciting, you sit back ready to tackle whatever other delightful medieval remedies come your way. After all, the plague could be lurking round any corner, and you'd better be prepared with your leeches at hand and a story to boot. What a charming time to be alive. Now it's time to talk about the delightful culinary mastery of the Middle Ages, preserving food. Spoiler, the answer is mostly, just put it in a bucket and hope for the best. If you were hoping for a modern-age refrigerator stocked with carefully sealed Tupperware, it's time for a reality check. In the Middle Ages, your food preservation methods often revolved around creativity and sheer desperation, wrapped up in a pigskin bag of anxiety. You see, with no real concept of hygiene, save the belief that grime was protective, people had to come up with some pretty wild solutions to keep their edibles from becoming unrecognisable science experiments. Let's start with meats. These noble proteins were often salted or smoked, but if you were really daring, you just let them hang in your home to cure for a few weeks. Imagine biting into that piece of cured beef and wondering whether it's dinner or dinner's last hurrah. Of course, you'd hang it near the fire, but that's not because it might spoil. Oh no, you were just trying to keep the flies at bay. The small army of flies buzzing around your kitchen was seen as a sort of flavourful seasoning in its own right, the medieval version of organic. If your meat had an odour that would clear a room, well, that was just character. And then there are the vegetables. Bless their hearts. Fresh produce might last about as long as a sneeze in a crowded tavern. Most folks relied on pickling, which sounds more appealing than it is. You would be dunking everything from cucumbers, a noble endeavour, to mysterious tubers of dubious origin into containers filled with brine, which very well could have been last year's rainwater, mixed with whatever residue, that flavour you can't quite identify. Tucked safely away in mud cellars, you'd pray those barrels don't explode from fermentation, all for a side of assorted pickles that likely tasted like regret. Let's talk about bread, shall we? The cornerstone of your diet if you were lucky enough to have any. What's that you say about maintaining freshness? Forget it. Most bread was made with whatever flour was available, even if it meant mixing in sawdust or acorns for bulk. But once baked, it was treated like a fine wine. The older the better, or at least that's what you convinced yourselves. You were supposed to eat today's loaf, but if you missed that mark, you'd just sneak a hunk out of the corner of your cupboard and chisel away at it like a medieval archaeologist trying to uncover ancient artifacts. Oh, and don't even get me started on leftovers. Have you ever eaten something that's been resting for several days in a pot and considered it a luxury? Welcome to the world of pottage. It's a thick stew that's been bubbling ever since last harvest, an unholy blend of whatever the villagers could scrounge together. It's a mystery stew, with ingredients added on a whim, layered over whatever has been languishing on the bottom. Nothing ever really goes to waste per se. It just keeps getting recycled until it morphs into a newly transfixed life form. You could say it's like the medieval version of a potluck, where you never knew who brought what. Now, what about fruits? In medieval Europe, fresh fruit was as transient as your neighbour's good intentions. When in season, they might be an option, but you must consume them immediately. Otherwise, they turned into mushy debate fodder. The rare treasures such as peaches or berries were often dried or tossed into a pie, which, let's be honest, was just another excuse to push around that suspicious flour mixture. Sugar was a luxury so precious it might as well have been stored in a vault with gold coins. For most people, using a sprinkle of cinnamon was practically a day at the spa. And we can't forget about dairy. If you lived far enough out from the town, you might risk keeping a cow or a goat. But the milk? Oh, goodness! It could spoil faster than you could say curdle. Cheese, on the other hand, was a bit more resilient with its mouldy charm. People were keen to let it age like a fine wine, leading to the strong scent that sent pigeons screaming away. This cheese has character, you'd declare, pinching your nose. In summary, if you survived a Middle Ages dietary mishap, you were doing better than most. Your odds of catching foodborne illnesses were about the same as finding a clean rat, residing comfortably in your hovel. So, the next time you complain about your left-out pizza, remember the medieval peasant who endured the culinary horrors of their time in splendid positivity, often lubricated with weak ale. It's a miracle they made it through the day, let alone survive to tell the tale. Cheers to that, and may your fridge always hold edible delights. After a long day, it's time to relax with a refreshing drink. You lift your tankard of beer that's been fermenting since last summer. At this point, you might as well just call it dinner and take a nap. The local tavern, always full of life, is your favourite spot for respite, albeit it often smells like track and field day at a pig farm. Your creaky self settles onto a wooden bench that has likely witnessed more drunken revelations than a therapy session with a monk. The rickety tables are sticky with what you hope is spilled beer rather than evidence of last week's food fight. Obtaining true cleanliness is much more of a fantasy than a reality here. As you watch the locals share stories of gallant knights and ferocious beasts, you can't help but wonder if any of it is true or merely the product of fermented bravado. It's way past the "what's the worst that can happen" stage of the evening, and drunken optimism reigns supreme. Ever tried telling a story after 2 pints? The last time you did, you ended up in a heated debate over whether your cousin's goat could beat an ostrich in a race. Spoiler alert, the goat's still on the family tree, but the ostrich? That's one for the history books. The music coming from the corner, if you can call it that, sounds like a gaggle of owls trying out their best attempts at harmonising. The tavern keeper, a stout man named Eamon, pours ale with the dexterity of a juggler, while balancing the weight of an opinion louder than the clamour that surrounds him. He has a knack for it. Around here, he's the town's de facto news anchor. When he's not pouring drinks, he's dispensing gossip that travels faster than a plague rat. Did you hear old Reginald's cow got burned in the latest raid? Right where it stood. Of course, rumours are saying it wasn't a raid, just Reginald's milky viaducts having a grand old time. Every shadowy corner, every crack in the wooden walls seems to hold a piece of a larger unfolding tale. You take a cautious sip of your ale, its taste a blend of smooth and sour, reminding you that brewing methods back then were as refined as a monkey on a unicycle. Still, it's lively, bubbling and ripe with the essence of, well, whatever was left in the kettle after last month's brewing. It may just be the base ingredient for the local health remedy, or as your grandmother would say, better drunk than infected. Even the barmaids are legends here, each juggling their own stories and occasionally the attention of the town's most eligible bachelors. You overhear a few flirtations happening just out of your sight, although it's hard to tell who's charming whom when they're all suitably inebriated. One lad, trying seduction and failing spectacularly, is pouring a compliment so thick it's practically a concrete barrier. Your hair is so radiant it must have been blessed by angels, he proclaims to a woman with a hairstyle that resembles a bird's nest after a storm. You wonder whether her accolade is from the heavens, or just the local livestock looking for a cosy place to roost. The evening progresses and you can't help but marvel at the lively dance of humanity before you. A couple of raucous patrons are trying to enact the latest heroic battle in history. Neither of them is the least bit heroic unless you count their ability to down mead from tankards as athletic prowess. Suddenly they tumble into a heap on the floor, and you can't help but chuckle, for in the grand tapestry of life, drunken tumbles are always a beloved pattern. Just when you think the shenanigans couldn't escalate further, a toast arises that echoes throughout the room. To the knights who've perished, may we all drink to forget their tales. They raise their tankards high, and against all odds, a spontaneous conga line breaks out, weaving its way around tables as patrons tromp unceremoniously to the beat of merriment and alcohol. You join in, regretting every moment already, but determined to at least leave with something resembling dignity, which at this point is lower than a rat's expectation of hygiene sat next to you. All in all, tavern life is darkly humorous, teetering precariously between joy and absurdity. And while life outside may not ever come close to resembling comfort or cleanliness, here in the tavern, your worries drown peacefully in the soupy depths of fermented goodness, and perhaps that's enough for tonight. You look around and realise this gathering of misfits, storytellers, and merry wanderers are a family of sorts, united in laughter, ale, and a shared understanding that tomorrow will probably be worse. But tonight is worth every drop of funky beer and outrageous tale. Ah yes, time to work. Whether you're ploughing fields or getting dragged into the Lord's latest scheme, the work is about as appetising as last week's pottage. You rise with the sun, jolted from your dreams of being swept off your feet by a handsome lord, only to find reality waiting for you with a rusty hoe and a stomach that's already grumbling like an angry bear. It's dawn, and the rooster's incessant crowing seems to be mocking your very existence. You should feel grateful for the opportunity to labour, but instead, you feel like a piece of livestock being led to slaughter, with slightly more back pain. As you drag yourself out of your hovel, just remember, coffee is a luxury reserved for those who can afford it, which you absolutely cannot. The closest thing you get to caffeine is a pint of weak ale from last night. A refreshing start if you're prepared to embrace the hangover you never quite shake off. You can practically smell the toil already. Damp earth, animal waste, and a hint of that unmistakable smell of despair mixed with sweat. Ah, the scent of productivity. You shuffle out into the fields where the glorious sun shines bright, perhaps too bright for the endless labour you're about to endure. Using the plough is a lot like pushing a very stubborn donkey in a straight line, and let's be honest, neither of you is particularly eager to cooperate today. Equipped with nothing but a rickety plough and a dog's bark in your ear, you push and shove through the mud, with each movement feeling like a special invitation to dozens of insects and critters who've decided your ankles are the latest hot spot. As you break the soil, you realise this isn't just hard work. It's the medieval equivalent of the gym, but without the whole, "Hey, look at me, I'm lifting weights" motivation. Every pull of the plough hurts more than your last breakup. Your shoulders protest with every heap of dirt you push aside, and if you weren't nearly numb from exhaustion, you might have bothered to complain. But why? Your fellow workers look just as miserable, and no one here is in the mood for a pity party. And heaven forbid you stop for more than a breath, because the moment you do, the Lord's overseer appears like a wraith, just waiting to remind you of your social standing and how you need to keep it moving if you want to eat tonight. And speaking of food, lunch is hardly a feast. You gather with your fellow labourers and dive head first into what can only be described as mystery pottage. The same gloop that you've been served since the last full moon, now slightly colder and more lumpy. Your palate has all but given up, but you shovel it down in the hope that your body will not spontaneously combust from hunger. You marvel at how something that looks like it could have been scraped from the bottom of a river can still contain the magical properties to both fill you up and make you question your life choices. But wait, just as you think you can wrap your mind around daily labour, the Lord's son rides up on his horse. The poor guy's had a little too much wine at breakfast, and now he's installed himself as a sort of feudal overlord, barking orders like a politically backed seal, with a penchant for theatrics. He's got grand plans for the land, and they all somehow involve you putting in more back-breaking work while he takes the credit. You exchange tired glances with your fellow peasants, each one thinking the same thing. At this point, a public execution might actually be a welcome distraction. Finally, after what feels like eons, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the fields, and you breathe a sigh of relief. You've survived another day of endless toil, but your body feels heavier than a sack of potatoes that just discovered it's about to be served for dinner. Your ankles ache, your back creaks, and let's not even talk about the mystery rash that has sprouted on your arm from who knows where. You hope it's not the plague. Then again, with your luck, it probably is. As you head back home, you reflect on the day's events. Who knew labouring in the fields was a sport more extreme than anything those nobles might partake in? But at least you get a good dose of camaraderie while trading ghost stories about the foreman's cooking skills or lack thereof. And who knows, which day might bring more than mere survival. Until then, it's off to your cosy straw bed that doubles as a bug sanctuary. Sleep tight, if you can. Here's a hilarious thought. You live in a house with no insulation, so winter is pretty much hell-wrapped in wool. You might find yourself half frozen, praying for the sun to appear, or at least for a chicken to spontaneously combust. As you huddle under your one suspiciously scratchy wool blanket, think of it as the medieval equivalent of being wrapped in a burrito made of sandals. You realise the wind is more of an actual enemy. It rattles through your poorly thatched roof, sounding more like a ghostly chorus of your ancestors lamenting their bad luck than a comforting breeze. The temperature plummets at night, and your body is left to contend with a delightful cocktail of frostbite and misery. It gets so cold that you sometimes wonder if your fingers are starting to turn into icicles, contemplating a career change as an actual snowman. You wake up daily to find your breath in a light fog, as if you're somehow still exhaling the last of the warmth you'd hoped to keep for the day. Throw in the fact that you're trying to navigate a floor that may either be damp, thanks to leaks in the roof, or crusty from a previous unfortunate chicken incident, and you have yourself the perfect morning routine. Now fast forward to summer, the time when you'd think simple warmth would bring everyone joy. Spoiler alert, it does not. Instead, your home turns into a clay oven, radiating heat that could rival a baker's sun-kissed bread. With no fans, air conditioning, or what we call common sense, your body becomes a sweaty, stinky river of discontent. All those medieval fashion choices start becoming death sentences as you're left with no option but to wear your wool tunic and pray it doesn't melt into your skin. The concept of cooling off is now a toxic fantasy, as every movement sends waves of perspiration cascading down your back while you simultaneously beg for a momentary breeze. Nature's way of teasing you. Flies have found a new best friend in your lack of hygiene, buzzing around you like they're auditioning for a particularly tragic medieval musical. You swat at the buzzing pests with the same ferocity you'd use to fend off Irish raiders. In theory, you should be experiencing the joys of summer, a time for good harvests and outdoor festivities. But who can celebrate when mosquitoes have formed a small army, and your body might have already taken up permanent residence as a boiling pot of sweat? And don't even think about the rain. When the skies finally do open up, they greet you with the ferocity of 1,000 angry squirrels. The occasional downpour not only drenches your clothes, but also serves to remind you of your unfortunate drainage system. Your house quickly transforms into either a sauna or a swamp, and more often than not, you might find yourself dodging raindrops that have turned the conversation to, who needs a new roof when we can just paddle through our next meal? As for the crops, well, you just pray for the best. After all, drought is a cruel mistress. You've got two options. Either sweat profusely in the field, or become a sad, sunburnt potato with the edible prospects of your neighbours hanging in the balance. What's worse is when other villagers discuss the drought by complaining that nothing will grow. You, however, know it's not just their crops in jeopardy. Your stomach is aching too, and you might end up having to trade your prized possessions for a few charred turnips that your neighbour swears are entirely edible, but do make you question their culinary sanity. And despite all this, nature continues to punish you. Walk outside on a warm day, and suddenly it feels as if there's a conspiracy against you, created by invading mosquitoes and a sun that should really consider getting a dimmer switch. Your days run together like poorly mixed paints, creating a murky hue of whining complaints and scrabbled together survival plans, with the resounding memory of sleeping through a night that felt more like a trip to the Ice Age than a summertime snooze. In summary, medieval weather is a horror story that no one can tap out of. Winter lasts too long, summer is unbearable, and whenever you think things couldn't get worse, a thunderstorm hits like a giant's fist at the end of your already unfortunate day. If cultivating a functional relationship with the elements wasn't enough, just remember that you have no control over the rampant lack of sanity in your world. At the end of the day, whether you're freezing or sweating, you can take comfort in one thing: you're surviving, which is actually a monumental feat in this medieval circus of calamity. Suddenly, your neighbours are turning up dead, and you're trying not to stare at the coughing man at the market. Is it just a cold, or is it time to start preparing a bag for the next life? It's a bit like being at a really bad party where everyone has decided to play the guess what will kill you next game, and you're just there hoping to avoid any airborne diseases while navigating your way around someone's new cow that got loose. Just last week, old Bert from down the street looked perfectly fine, and now he's nothing but a headline on the local rumour mill. Bert takes a permanent nap. As you dodge the crumbling wall of your hovel that seems to lean a bit too far to the left for comfort, the air carries with it an aroma that's part stale bread and part existential dread. Everyone knows the plague has been lingering around town like a bad smell that just won't clear out, and now it's taken hold of Bert. You can almost hear Bert's ghost begging you not to share your lunch with it. Nothing says good times like a public health crisis that rolls in with as much grace as an uninvited uncle at a family reunion. The neighbourhood's apocalypse vibe is palpable. The local barber surgeon, who insists that bleeding helps, is now the hottest ticket in town, and folks are lined up outside his door with tokens of desperate hope. their paltry wages, some livestock, and a rather ill-tempered goose as their sacrificial offering. Bleed the plague away, you mutter sarcastically to yourself. You're not entirely sure why offering the barber surgeon a live chicken seems like a logical solution, but hey, desperate times call for desperate poultry. Everyone's looking for answers, and the latest theory is that the plague is a punishment sent from God for all those awful barroom affairs and too many hefty meals of questionable meat. As medieval philosophy goes, there's nothing quite like a bit of divine retribution to explain the sudden disappearance of your favourite neighbour. At least when the church lady hedges her bets on your morals, you can mutter a few Hail Marys and hope for the best. You chat with the town drunk, who seems to have taken an interest in the notion that perhaps it's not a sickness at all, but a conspiracy crafted by the local aristocrats to rid themselves of pesky peasants. "It's them, I tell you," he rants, flinging some straw into the air for dramatic effect. "They want to take our land and turn us into gossipy ghosts." You can't help but stifle a laugh as you wonder how many of the local lords would want to get their hands dirty in the peasantry business. After all, the plague is making life about as pleasant as a root canal without anaesthesia. Amidst all this chaos, you attempt to maintain some semblance of existence, or at least hope your list of chores doesn't include dying today. You take a gander to your neighbour's broken wall, which seems ripe for climbing as you contemplate a day away from it all, or a lover's leap that's too dire for anyone to notice your absence. There's no real reason why a short hike to the nearest hill can't be an impromptu party during a pandemic, right? At this point, the hills are better company than your impertinent livestock. Out of the corner of your eye, you see the local priest round the corner, eyes wide like he'd just spotted a ghost. Thankfully, he's too lost in thought pondering sermons about eternal damnation and endless penance to pay you much attention. "Can't anyone just keep it down about the dead?" you quip nervously. If salvation is having a proper laugh in a time of crisis, then you might just consider yourself well endowed with heavenly fortunes. As evening falls, you quickly light a few candles in solidarity against the shadowy uncertainty that looms overhead, or at least to distract from the neighbours who are unceremoniously carting off the deceased. Social distancing has never felt so eerily necessary, as if the entire vicinity has turned into a macabre chessboard where each missing piece hints at impending doom. Yet, surrounded by your own worries, you remind yourself that humans have persevered through less than favourable circumstances before. So now raise your candle and toast to the absurdity of it all. The suspicions, the shouting, and the glimmer of laughter in the midst of doom. Because if the plague doesn't get you, the gossip from the town crier sure will. As you settle down for the night, wrapped in your woolen blanket, you can only hope that tomorrow will bring a fresher plague theory that at least provides some entertainment. Because really, what's a little haunting among neighbours in the Middle Ages? Trust me, you know when you've gotten on the bad side of the village mayor because criteria for punishment is about as strict as a butter churn. Spoiler, it usually involves violence. In medieval times, justice is fundamentally about efficiency through entertainment, mixed with a good dose of communal fear. As you stroll through the dusty streets, you might spot a helpful sign indicating what some poor soul did to earn a one-way ticket to the gallows. Perhaps someone attempted to poach a deer from the Lord's forest, or maybe they just forgot to pay their taxes. It wasn't exactly a forgiving system, so get ready for the big event. It's public execution day, and naturally the townsfolk have gathered round as if it's the latest blockbuster premiere, one where the leading man usually meets a grisly end. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat, courtesy of the tavern that knows how to capitalise on human curiosity, and you can hear the excited chatter of peasants who can't wait to watch the show. Grown men will pretend to be farmers while trying to discreetly shove their kids behind them, all the better to shield young eyes from the grisly realities of life back then. As you get closer, you notice the spectacle that's about to unfold. a wooden platform adorned with the village's least favourite executioner, a burly figure with a demeanour that's somewhere between a drunk bear and a grumpy goat. Everyone knows he's about as gentle as a coal shovel to the face. And can we take a moment to appreciate his attire? Ripped tunic, suspicious stains, and the sharpest looking axe anyone has seen since, well, ever. You might wonder who would choose this profession, but the truth is it beats being just another village peasant about to meet an equally unpleasant fate. Now, before you start feeling judgy about the accused person, because let's face it, we love to gossip while the others find their seating, you realise that today's unfortunate soul is not only facing their doom, but doing so in full medieval fashion. They're usually ushered toward the chopping block wearing a sack that was probably the worst excuse for clothing they could find. Ever thought about fashion emergencies? They seem to have reached historically epic proportions for the condemned. As the crowd hushes, you can practically hear a pin drop. Or is it a distant chicken laying a particularly traumatic egg? The executioner, after what feels like an eternity of providing suspense, raises his axe dramatically in the air, as if preparing to conduct a bizarre symphony of doom. You hold your breath, bracing for the dramatic moment before the blade comes crashing down. Spoiler alert, it'll be quick. Well, quick for the audience, not so much for the poor soul. The whole scene is so over the top that it feels like something out of an exaggerated medieval drama. Only you can't click away. Surprisingly enough, this performance is only as captivating as the gruesomeness allows. You're left wondering if there is darker comedy lurking in these public displays. These are not just executions. They're an elaborate show meant to underline the authority of the village mayor and the law. Play nice, or this could be you. There's a twisted sense of morality that comes with it, like a grim lesson wrapped in an entertainment package designed for the masses. You can almost picture the mayor with a smug grin, taking mental notes of who's showing the most enthusiasm, because you know he'll somehow use that for his agenda later. Later on, everyone will probably celebrate with more drinks and a hearty laughter over the morbid today's entertainment provided. Is this any way to live, you ponder, amidst the chatter rising like the smoke from the bonfire? But the truth is, this performance of death is one of the few moments where the community can bond, united over someone else's fate, their empathy dulled by time, or perhaps just to stave off a grim fate of their own. And while we're at it, let's not forget about the gossips who will surely embellish every aspect of this execution. Peasant life is certainly equal parts survival and dramatic storytelling. By nightfall, you'll hear tales of how the villain was a secret sorcerer who turned the crops bad, or how they cried for mercy until the very last moment. That's the beauty of medieval storytelling. What begins as fear can easily transform into entertainment. So, while you'd hope to escape this scenario, today you witnessed the spectacle that was considered the height of justice and community engagement. You might even leave with a new understanding of your own mortality. Because let's face it, in medieval peasantry, it's not just your life that's on the line, it's your reputation too. Welcome to the wild world of medieval politics, where heads may roll but the stories live on, often gaining more intrigue and drama than they ever had in life. Don't even think about cleaning your hovel. You live amongst livestock and they certainly hold the candidacy for filthiness. You might just want to abandon ship. Your home is a lovely rustic little structure made from logs and mud, a perfectly adequate model of questionable construction where grass and hay seamlessly blend with, well, whatever the goats left behind. It's got charm, if by charm you mean a revolving door policy for pests, worms and possibly a raccoon family trying to reclaim their ancestral land. Speaking of charm, the stench that wafts from your corner of the house, where the chickens like to roost for the night, could knock a horse out cold. Instead of a lovely floral scent wafting through the air, you're treated to a bouquet of regret, old eggs, wet hay, and a hint of despair. You might even think the smell has developed its own personality. Perhaps you should name it something like Sir Stinkalot or Lord Foulness. After all, if you're going to live in this olfactory nightmare, you might as well have a laugh about it. Every now and again, you might consider cleaning. The idea greets you like an old friend, but you just want to dive back into your cosy pile of dirt and murky memories. So, what can you do? Instead of scrubbing floors, you'll spend your time dodging the onslaught of life, including but not limited to your neighbour's bestiary roaming your domicile. You might pick up a broom now and again, but it usually ends up leaning against the wall as you cozy up with a jug of fresh home brew, your most reliable companion in times of crisis. When you do try to get your life in order, you quickly realise cleaning is a total myth. What is sweeping when the dirt floor will never be dirt-free? You'd need to invent some sort of dirt vacuum, powered by sheer wishful thinking, and even then, it could only suck up your last vestiges of sanity. Plus, there's only one set of tools in a medieval peasant's toolkit. Everything else you own is borrowed, stolen, or last year's fermenting vegetables. Now, when it comes to decor, prepare to be underwhelmed. Forget about Pinterest-inspired walls clad in fine artwork or aesthetic touches. Your decor involves a few scratched wooden beams, untamed straw, and a delightful medley of spider webs. You might want to consider it a modern tapestry. Don't expect people to pop by for tea either. Your neighbours are busy swimming through their own filth or tending to whatever livestock has gone rogue this week. Wondering about maintenance? What's that? Leaking roof? Oh, just stick a bucket under it and call it rainwater collection. That's right. Who needs a plumber when you can have a thriving ecosystem of cockroaches? They provide company as you implore the clouds above to take a break. You send out silent prayers to whatever god may be listening, promising some strange offering if only the rain would stop before your floor turns into an indoor pond. As charming as this lifestyle might sound, it's actually a delicate balance of survival. The worms in your patch of dirt are hard at work, cultivating their own vegetable garden, without your help. While you wonder what's for dinner, the last of that pottage, a hint of desperation, and just a sprinkle of hope. The reality check hits, since you don't even have a window to crank open, let alone any semblance of fresh air or hygiene. And when it comes to sacrifices, be prepared for those too. You're on the front lines of the Great Rat War, currently waging in and around your bed, where each night is a cacophony of squeaks, scratching, and very personal encounters with unwanted roommates. Your perceived cleanliness simply can't keep up with a kingdom of critters. So, whether it's catching up with the neighbours about that smell, or gazing at the ceiling hoping the rafters will hold out one more night, your daily maintenance is simply managing to exist. The art of living becomes a delicate dance of acceptance mixed with acceptance. After all, cleanliness might just be out of your league. Why scrub these floors when you can embrace the guaranteed authenticity of a medieval hovel? And honestly, in a world so bleak, 3 cheers for the charm of chaos. Pets, more like roommates you didn't ask for. Your living arrangements include fleas, lice, and the occasional rodent who's basically the landlord at this point. It's not unusual to wake up in the morning feeling like you're sharing your bed with an entire ecosystem, complete with a cacophony of insects and the soft rustling of furry squatter friends. Who needs a dog when you can have the family cat Gary, who's actually plotting your demise every time you walk past the fireplace? At some point you start to wonder if all this chaos is just a metaphor for your chaotic life. Let's discuss the charming allure of a medieval household. Your one-room hovel is supposed to be a cosy nest of warmth and love, unless, of course, you count the love bites from the bedbugs. Yes, those little critters are having a party on your skin, and you didn't even RSVP. Every night feels like a battle as you swat at imaginary foes in your slumber, while the real enemies munch merrily away on your exposed legs and arms like you're some gourmet appetizer. The itching might become unbearable, and you're left wondering if you have more in common with your itchy companions than your own family. And as for the mice, they rule the roost. You've got a whole colony of them feeling right at home, often scurrying into your kitchen to scavenge for the crumbs you left after your last meal. Yes, that cold pottage you've been using as a breakfast transition. Your pets are like your most accomplished housemates. They do all the recycling for you. That leftover bread? Apparently it makes for exquisite mouse dining. Just when you think they might be working on a 4-course French menu in your pantry, you spot them nodding off for an afternoon beauty sleep, snuggled in your family's one and only pair of socks. You have no idea how many layers of dirt and grime those socks contain, but at this point, that seems like a minor detail. Feeling nauseous? You may need to brace yourself. It's not just your skin crawling in discomfort, it's the constant companionship of critters larger than your expectations of quality housing. Ever tried sharing the dinner table with a rat? They're surprisingly assertive about their claims to the brown bread and cheese. Victory in securing your portion is basically a battle of wits, and odds are, you're losing. You might even develop a begrudging respect for them and start pondering the philosophy of rodent existence. I mean, they have every right to be here, don't they? And because your medieval diet rarely offers much protein, those fluffy little companions become such a crucial part of your surroundings that you might mistakenly name them. That's right, you give them names like Cheddar or Mickey organically, hoping to soften the blow of their nightly feasts on your possessions. But let's be honest, talking to an infestation feels a lot like a desperate attempt to cultivate hope amidst sheer devastation. Hey, you little furball, keep the nibbling to a minimum, I'm saving that crust for tomorrow morning. While you debate the ethics of mouse ownership, consider the dogs of the Middle Ages, who serve a slightly different purpose. They're just as likely to be poorly trained. Part guard dog, part dinner for wolves lurking outside your wretched abode. There's really no delicate way to put it, except for the noble and rich, who have their exquisite trained hounds. For everyone else, 4-legged friends double as loyal guardians and dubious security systems, usually lying about lazily while they bark at shadows. And if you live in a medieval town, the feral dog population is basically a wild club of unsanctioned guardians who wouldn't think twice about lunging at you while you're trying to get home from the market with a sack of questionable turnips. But don't worry, at the end of the day, having any animal about is better than no company at all. Who wouldn't want furry squatters to share the warmth of the fire with? Sure, they may be the cause of your nightly anxieties and constant itchiness, but they bring a sense of community to an otherwise dreary existence. After all, they are just trying to survive as best as they can, just like you. Maybe the real lesson here is that we're all a bit of a mess, living in the same chaotic universe where being a squatter is as common as actually paying your rent. So raise a glass of weak ale. You've bonded with furry pests about as well as you could hope. Cheers to shared chaos and delightful discomfort in the wild world of medieval living. If you think dating was easier back then, think again. Your romantic pursuits might be limited due to the constant prevalence of death and disinfectants that are literally nowhere to be found. Love in the Middle Ages was less like a sweet serenade and more like a tragic ballad sung in a tavern, where joy was drowned in cheap ale and sorrow lingered like the smell of last week's goat stew. So, put on your best medieval tunic and let's stumble into this chaotic love story. Picture this. You're at the local market, deftly dodging the coughs of your neighbour, who might be one sneeze away from the grave. There she is, Agnes from down the lane, looking more radiant than a late spring flower, despite her tunic smelling faintly of mildew. You think, here's my chance. But your heart sinks as you remember. Courting her means getting close enough to smell her probably unwashed hair. And listen, personal hygiene is less of a concern when living in an era that could double as a survival of the fittest episode. How do you strut your romantic stuff when half the town is battling the Black Death? The era's equivalent of dating consisted of awkward glances during Sunday Mass and quickly exchanged uncomfortable pleasantries as everyone engaged in the medieval ritual of avoiding eye contact. Imagine trying to woo someone while sharing a communal cup of, wait for it, beer. That's right, ale for breakfast, lunch and dinner, because who needs wine when you might not sleep in your own bed tonight? As you sip from the same mug, you can almost taste the plague. Once you muster the courage to approach Agnes, you might consider serenading her beneath a window at night, assuming you can dodge the constantly flying chamber pots your neighbour joyfully flings out of the window. But remember, your grand gestures might just be met with indistinct cries of "Be gone, you flea-ridden fool!" Not exactly the romantic response you were hoping for. It's like trying to candlelight dinner with only a handful of worm-infested bread. You can't charm anyone when charm itself is being whisked away by the smell of death, metaphorically and literally. When it comes to actual interactions, flirting becomes an extreme sport. Your best bet. Complimenting her turnips or offering to help her with the family's daily labour. Nothing says, "I admire you," quite like showing you're willing to work while she toils under the watchful eye of a nearby goat. Simply put, your compliments need to be creative. "Hey Agnes, your hands are as skilled as a sorceress at casting spells, especially when kneading bread." That may just be the winning ticket to her heart, or at the very least a smile. But fear not, even in a plague-stricken town, love finds a way to seem as whimsical as ever. Courtly love exists as a concept, especially amongst the noble class. Knights would express their adoration with poems, perhaps joined with plumes from their helmets. Yet, for most folks in your community, it's considerably dirtier, literally. There were no romantic moonlit walks unless you fancied tripping over mud or dodging a flock of angry geese. Moreover, if you managed to steal a kiss, you'd better be ready to duck and cover, as gossip travels faster than the speed of a light in your town. If you're caught, prepare for judgment and disapproval from the local villagers, who had little better to do than critique your romantic life while dodging the constant threat of the plague. What kind of a man risks the kiss of a woman despite the impending doom? They'd cluck, shaking their heads like the great medieval alarm system they were. As such, many marital arrangements during these times were more about survival than romance. Alliances were formed not over candlelit dinners, but rather for the sake of acquiring resources or land, and honestly, it often felt less like love and more like real estate transactions. Your best option might be to find a spouse from a family with a cow to spare, and maybe then you'll have a name, a title, and a fighting chance at a somewhat interesting life. So there you have it. In a world of leeches, gibbets, and locusts, romance narrates its own tragic comedy. The quest for love may be perilous, strained through the reality of flea-infested beds and plague threats, but at the heart of it all lies that indomitable human spirit, searching for connection even in places where love seems laughably out of reach. To be fair, as you stumble back to your hovel after a failed date, you may just find solace in knowing that, at the very least, you still won't know how much worse it could get, unless you take that risk again tomorrow. But what's life without a little danger, right? Thriving in the Middle Ages, not so easy. You think you're going to rise and shine in this time period? Nope. Getting a leg up in a society that's stuck in its feudal system is like climbing a mountain made of mud in a rainstorm. In the Middle Ages, your social status was as fixed as your neighbour's goat, and ambition was often met with a hearty laugh, a sneer, or worse, a nice leisurely trip to the gallows if the Lord was in a particularly bad mood that day. So let's break down what it really means to thrive, or just survive, when you're 20 steps down the social ladder. First off, let's talk about the joy of social hierarchy. You wake up every morning not as a noble with grand titles or lands, but as a peasant. Congratulations. In this world, your best bet is to keep your head down, work the fields, and hope that your lord's dinner doesn't look too appetizing. Picture this. You've just spent hours toiling under a relentless sun, back aching and stomach grumbling, only to have your lord's cook dumping the remnants of roast meat in a pig trough, only to be sniffed at and ignored by every hungry beast in the vicinity. Here's hoping your lot comes in next harvest season, or even for a feast, if you're lucky enough not to be on the chopping block. And while we're on the subject of feasts, let's discuss what it takes to pull off a noble's banquet. For your lord, it means gobbling down roasted peacock and sprinkled sugar on everything. For you, it means figuring out how to stretch a few root vegetables across 3 hungry mouths, while listening to the next-door neighbours squabble about whose goat is the more reliable milk-maker. Your culinary masterpiece? Probably something lovingly dubbed meatless mystery stew, so you can skip the part where you actually admit to anyone what went into it. Friendships in this period are just as precarious as your survival. Finding buddies isn't the hard part. Everyone's in need of camaraderie while tipsy on cheap ale. The catch? You better never let anyone find out about your secret stash of bread. Sudden friendship over drinks. It turns into an inquisition once the loaf goes missing, and your neighbour's chicken mysteriously ends up in your stew. Life's rough enough without accusations of hospitality theft. Next, let's say you ever dream of getting some fancy training or education. Don't even think about it. There's no fancy school for you. Just the local priest trying to convince you that secretly questioning the church is a gateway to hell. The concept of reading is about as likely as finding a unicorn passing your hovel. Nobility, on the other hand, require all the education money can buy, while you're busy trying not to trip over the feral dogs on your way to the field, praying your legs don't crumble under you. If, by some infuriating twist of fate, you manage to score a promotion, maybe your lord notices that you're moderate at making grain sacks. Congratulations. Your new role means no real pay increase, but a delightful title to add to your collection of worries. Congratulations on becoming the Lord's token farmer. Do try not to die of exhaustion while cultivating 3 types of erosion-resistant crops. Remember, there are no weekends. Should you feel lucky enough to survive the never-ending grind of feudal labour, the best-laid plans can disintegrate faster than a week-old biscuit. As if on cue, here comes the next wave of trouble: illness. Your odds of catching a fever after tending to the animals are about as high as accidentally trading your last 8 potatoes for an old wooden spoon you'll never use. Speaking of which, you may find yourself slumped in bed a lot. But hey, don't forget to pray, because nothing says thriving quite like begging divine intervention for a few more days on Earth among the flies and the random assortment of livestock. You finally manage some sleep, adorned in your not-so-sexy wool tunic, dreaming of feudal glory that you'll probably never see. But then you wake up seeing stars, or possibly even the face of the divine itself, and think to yourself, maybe I should have just stayed in my mum's hut. So remember, thriving in the Middle Ages is less about ambition and more about endurance. If your backbone feels like it's been twisted into a pretzel after toiling in the fields, you're doing just fine. If your dreams involve simply not being buried under 6 feet of mud, welcome aboard. In this period, nobody promised comfort, but hey, the good humour of shared misery, that's priceless. Just keep moving, keep scraping by, and for heaven's sake, keep your stash of bread hidden. Your local priest is always around, which means there's very little breathing space. Dreading confession has become a full-time job. Here's hoping he doesn't find out that you used that stolen cow. The church has an uncanny ability to pop up wherever you least want it. Like that one relative who refuses to leave the party. You could be simply trying to enjoy a bit of peace and quiet when suddenly the church bell tolls, echoing like a dramatic soundtrack to your medieval misery. There's no escaping it. Morning, noon, and night. Someone's ready to put God on speed dial for your every little sin. Imagine this scene. It's a misty Monday morning, and you're stealthily walking past the church, trying to avoid the priest's penetrating gaze. But there's no luck. Brother Thomas catches you with that hawk-like focus of his. "My child!" he shouts, as you frantically look for an oncoming wagon to duck beneath. You'd think he was yelling fire instead of, "Let's talk about your soul." You hesitate, thinking, was it a mortal sin or just, a regular Tuesday offence? The tension builds. Your late-night goat-stealing escapades have a way of creeping back up on you like a bad case of the fleas. The irony is almost too thick to slice through. You're expected to confess all your sins, yet you're absolutely terrified of what will happen when you do. The church, your supposed sanctuary, has become more of a reality show, and you're the unfortunate contestant who keeps getting voted off. You've got that awkward hunch in your shoulders, which seems to signal, "Look out, I'm about to spill all my secrets." But you've sworn to keep your mouth shut about that one time you tried to barter a baby goat for a pint of ale. That would just ruin your reputation. Still, you shuffle your way into the confession booth behind the church. This little wooden cubicle might offer some privacy, but it's also practically a medieval therapist's office. On one side there's a flat, hidden face behind a curtain, and on your side you're stuck trying to find words that won't send your eternal soul straight to the fiery depths of hell. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." That's your go-to line, even if what follows usually involves the phrase, "running away from responsibilities." But what really gets you sweating is when Father Thomas asks about your recent removal of a chicken from old Mrs. Bramble's coop. The guilt. You can't help but think that confessing to a priest might start veering more into a therapy session. So, how does stealing a chicken make you feel? Because if the priest sat down long enough to analyse your feelings, you'd probably end up crying about lost chickens, inadequate living conditions, and that unfortunate incident with the rat that somehow became your best friend. It's all too much. At least there's some consolation in knowing many of your fellow villagers are in similar boats, though their boats might be a tad more luxurious than your own rickety skiff. The same priest who insists on Saturday confessions is also the one doling out harsh penances, like catching fleas from the neighbour's goat, and you just know that if you meekly admit to missing Sunday service for a little wooden sword play with the neighbourhood kids, you'll walk out with nothing less than 3 Our Fathers, 5 Hail Marys, and a stern lecture on filial duty. You didn't sign up for medieval guilt trips, but here you are forced to play the role of penitent peasant. With harvest season approaching, everyone's desperate to keep the priest on their good side. Who knows? Maybe that extra prayer will prevent bad weather. There's a fine line between surviving the drought and begging for the rains, and you're well aware the big guy upstairs has a wicked sense of humour. Between worried prayers and half-cooked pottage, you've got a real predicament. In this world, sometimes it's a struggle to keep faith while dodging accusations of ill-doing from the local magistrate. Life may be one huge struggle against nature and medieval expectations, but as you walk away from the church, perhaps feeling a bit lighter from having confessed and a joke or two exchanged about the market's questionable cheeses, you can't help but smile through the layers of grime and guilt. It's the humour in this chaotic existence that keeps the darkness at bay, if only just a bit. Because in the end, surviving the Middle Ages might be the real miracle, with God joking alongside you every step of the way. You may want a friend, but transactional relationships weren't uncommon, often revolving around livestock or shared misery. But hey, just don't bring up the recent deaths. It's a mood killer. In medieval society, if you weren't bonding over the latest sickness to sweep through town, you were likely bickering about whose goat was bleating too loudly, or which neighbour's cow had taken an impromptu tour through your vegetable patch. Remember, in a time when survival was as uncertain as the local priest's half-baked theological musings, the last thing you needed was to crush the vibes by discussing Robert's unfortunate demise or, heaven forbid, the resurgence of the plague. Friendships here have a certain pragmatism. A neighbour doubles as your unofficial therapist, listening to your woes for the price of a couple of eggs and an unspecified amount of goodwill. "Hey, you can have my last hen, just keep the grim tales away," is a common negotiation around the fire. So when you're sharing rations or lamenting the state of your crumbling thatch roof, you navigate the conversation as carefully as a tightrope walker during a plague exhibition. Speaking of exhibitions, it seems just about everyone in town has quite the collection of ailments. Did you hear about the psoriasis of Peter, or the tumorous tumult of Timothy? Such is life in the medieval friendship circle, where woes are exchanged like baubles, everyone trying to outsour each other for the fun of it. "Well, my cousin just passed and he had the plague," you might say casually. "Oh darling, that's nothing. My aunt literally exploded last week after an unfortunate encounter with a giant potato." Friends become your twisted version of therapy dogs, treating sorrows as social currency, but conveniently ignoring the grim reality lurking just around the corner. Your potential friends are also adept at devising creative ways to communicate their despair. The latest catchy phrase circulating around the village is, "To die is divine, but the wheezing is murderous." Socializing becomes a hybrid form of coping mechanism and death watch, where laughter is closely followed by hushed conversations about who might be next. Of course, everyone is a fan of dark humour, a necessary balm when life feels more like a Victorian horror novel than a cosy community story. At times, you find solace in conversations about the weather. When all else fails, everyone can agree on one thing: rain is terrible for your crops. "Ah, the rain. Nature's cruel joke," you exclaim to your neighbour, who nods sagely, "until the ground gets too muddy, and then it becomes a drowned rat's ball." You'd think the topic would be a pleasant break from the woes of human suffering. But the truth is, it's all too easy to spiral into territorial battles over whose turn it is to carry the sloshy pig feed after the last flood. And what about that one questionable friend who always invites you? For dinner, you know the type. The neighbour whose cooking is more dangerous than a plague-infested rat. Sure, the gaudy displays of questionable ingredients are fun, but after your last homemade surprise, you vowed never to eat anything that didn't come from your own garden. Is that goat cheese, or goat something else? You ponder, contemplating the risks of swallowing whatever concoction they've presented before you. But alas, where else can you get a well-lit window into their household chaos? When you actually consider the benefits of these bonds, you realise that friendships can provide more than just shoulder-shaking laughter or solemn agreement on the inevitability of death. They also offer those precious moments of distraction that can sometimes feel like a lifeboat amidst the churning waters of mortality. While you might frequently wish you could just hit pause on the reality of your daily life, at least you are not navigating it alone. Through it all, there's a strange beauty in this social despair. Overturning barrels of laughter while teetering on the brink of misery cultivates a particular resilience. Here you are, painting a modest tapestry of existence amidst the chaos, the jokes, the sorrowful tales, and the whispers of tragedy becoming the very fabric of your friendships. Friends don't let friends face the plague alone, you rationalise, impressed with your capacity to shrug off proximity to tragedy. After all, Who needs an easy life when camaraderie runs deep? You pat yourself on the back for your ability to adapt. Medieval friendships, ridiculous, practical, and always a tiny bit gross, seem to be the saving grace in an era fueled by an ever-looming threat of death. With the meagre allowance of public holidays and festivals, excitement seems to spring from nowhere. You'll drink cheap beer and dance to tunes that sound like random barn animals. Yes, folks, welcome to the grand spectacle of medieval merriment, where the aroma of unwashed bodies mingles with the scent of rancid cheese, and everyone is just a little too close for comfort. The town square, your makeshift dance floor for the day, is absolutely teeming with people. Some dancing and others shuffling about like rudderless ships, trying desperately to avoid stepping on, well, anything that might resemble human waste. Can you feel the thrill of anticipation? The local lord has generously declared today a day of revelry. Just yesterday he sneezed through the proclamation, which actually made it feel more like a threat than a celebration. But who are you to question? Wrapped in your one pair of woolen socks, the only things keeping your toes from frostbite, you're ready to embrace whatever paltry joy comes your way. So grab your tankard of weak ale and let's head into the fray. As the sun inches toward midday, the joyful cacophony rises. There's the town crier, who really ought to be called the town whiner given his recent cold, attempting to throw a game of horseshoes while Meg, the baker's daughter, sets up a booth selling stale bread, likely lucking out by using yesterday's leftovers. It's the medieval version of a bake sale, but no one's asking too many questions about freshness here. After all, calories are calories, and there's Herbert, the local bard, read as the guy who can barely carry a tune, but makes up for it with enthusiasm. He clutches a lute that looks like it's been chewed on by a very dedicated goat, and honestly, that might explain the sound. But in this moment, it doesn't matter if he's singing off-key. His pitch of despair blends perfectly with the festive atmosphere. You can't help but bob your head to the rhythm of his offbeat strumming. Speaking of contests, let's not forget the centrepiece of every festival, the games. Today you'll witness the ever-popular Who Can Toss the Heavier Stone contest, a top-tier event for anyone who's ever wanted to exhibit their upper body strength, or lack thereof, in front of an audience. Imagine 6-pound stones, lauded as weapons of war, being thrown with grace by men built like brick houses, and sometimes by the occasional drunken lad hoping to impress the barmaids by taking out the local cabbage vendor. Spoiler. Most people can't dodge or catch a stone, and some unfortunate soul will probably end up getting hit. Mid-afternoon rolls around, and it's time for the bread-eating contest, in which contestants inhale stale crusts like they're the last bit of air in a drowning ship. The winner, of course, earns not only the bragging rights, but also a mildly warm loaf as a prize. Grinning, you think of refusing to participate in this carb-fueled battle, but you're also acutely aware that you haven't eaten since yesterday. A middling idea presents itself. Why not make an attempt to triumph over what will surely be a long line of participants before buckling your way into a more complex idea like using utensils? By sunset, it feels like the entire town has become one wild community of festival goers, stumbling into one another with cans of elixir, read more weak ale, in hand, laughing, singing and forgetting, for at least a few hours, about the sweat, dirt and constant threat of plague. It's camaraderie at its finest, a wonderful flash of joy when the realities of life slip away, if only for a time. But as the evening draws near, exhaustion sets in, and the magic of the festival begins to dwindle. Grumbling people begin to filter back toward home. The townsfolk will head off, remembering the contest feats, and more importantly the scrounged up drinks that will be spoken of as legendary adventures in the town well for weeks to come. Yet, left in the remnants of the laughter and chaos, you ponder how tomorrow, and the days to follow, life will fall back into the usual cycle of back-breaking work, flea-infested beds, and questionable health choices. Balancing a half-eaten stale hunk of bread, you already appreciate the sense of community and warmth, if only temporary, that lets you endure the reality of another week. Because in the medieval world, laughter and festivity are fleeting, and let's be honest, sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you from wailing into your pottage. So, as you make your way home, skirt the sheep, dodge the cow pies, and perhaps pray to your preferred deity to keep you healthy until the next merriment comes around, because it's really just a matter of time before the routine sets in, and you find yourself planning the next opportunity to dance like everyone is watching, and festival time. Farming is more complex than cultivating skills. Grab a hoe and start digging. Let's just say you might be too short on food and too long on expectations. The medieval era is often romanticised as a time of golden wheat fields and bountiful harvests. But spoiler alert, the reality is more akin to scratching out a meagre existence from unforgiving earth that seems to hold grudges. When you wake up in your hovel, it's not the chirping of birds you hear, but the soul-crushing realisation that the last potato you planted has probably gone on an extended vacation, never to return. So, let's set the scene. You trudge out into the fields with your trusty wooden hoe in hand, which resembles a glorified stick more than a tool. The ground beneath your feet is likely a mystery of mud, exposed roots, and occasional animal droppings, making every step a gamble. The smell? Ugh, let's not even start on the scent. A delightful mix of damp earth and something you can only hope isn't rotting. At this early hour, the sun isn't even fully awake, yet you're already wrestling with nature to coax life from this stubborn patch of dirt. You've heard stories of glorious harvests, where the crops practically leap out of the ground like eager little children in a candy store. And yet, here you are, staring down at a sad collection of weeds and a few disheartened seeds that might make it if the stars align just right. All this about a harvest of plenty. As you kneel in your mud-soaked tunic, you hear the whispers of other farmers, the self-declared experts. You need a little prayer, a drop of pig blood, and good luck, they say, tossing salt over their shoulders as if that will ward off a bad crop. An act that would scare off jealous crows who are probably just using your field as a comfort stop anyway. But superstition doesn't feed the family, does it? Just ask that one neighbour whose entire crop was turned to something resembling medieval fertiliser last summer. He swears it was the evil eye from the baker's wife. With painstaking effort, you begin your day's work, your hands blistering on the hoe's handle. Welcome to the medieval agricultural experience, where you barter back-breaking labour to raise a disappointing number of turnips. Word on the street says peasants often relied on these little gems, which are about as enjoyable as chewing on cardboard. But hey, at least they're healthy. Mind over matter, right? Midway through this delightful task, cue dramatic eye roll. Your significant other, or your neighbour, probably both because who doesn't love unsolicited advice, starts chatting about crop rotation. They preach like modern-day botanists about how planting beans next to corn and pulling out the rogue weeds somehow alters the cosmic order of crop health. You can't help but wonder what good techniques and odd-shaped legumes do when your land seems bent on rebelling against you. As day turns into night, you feel the weight of dirt itch under your fingernails. A badge of honour in this hard life, you guess. You also realise you've grown to intimately know the fields around your hovel better than your own children. Who needs a history book when the land tells all through harvests gone bust? And speaking of harvest time, let's have a toast. Or rather, a sober gathering to watch your neighbour gather the wheat his wife was sure to bake into that rare loaf of bread that would never make it to your table. Yes, the community gathers to celebrate the fruits of labour, and you'd rather not be the one who forgot to bring anything again. As you work, you can't help but overhear the latest gossip from the local Lord's Court about how they're raising taxes for the next harvest. Taxing the ever-dwindling crops is like squeezing gold from a rock. It just doesn't work, much like asking someone to enjoy old pottage. You watch as the sly lord pats himself on the back while you pray he doesn't come to collect soon, as you've sworn to save every bit of grain for the winter, if you live that long. Ah, such is the enchanting cycle of medieval agriculture. Toil, sweat, deep-seated disappointment, and the dread of impending doom. As the sun dips below the horizon, you finally stagger home, filthy and bone-tired, reassured by the timeless truth. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all over again. After all, the only thing worse than a failed harvest is the freshness of a new day after a long night in your hovel, where the stink still lingers like a bad relationship. So, as you tumble into your straw-stuffed bed, remember, this is not just farming. This is survival. Comedy and chaos wrapped in a layer of mud, hardship and a pinch of irony. If the land won't yield, then perhaps a good laugh and some companionship will help you sow the seeds of perseverance for another day. Ready for the next adventure in this wild medieval ride? Your life is a living documentary of occasional invasions, warlords, and that one day someone threatens to come in and burn your hut down for no good reason. Fun, right? Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the term surviving the day had a myriad of meanings, none of which involved peace or quiet. You're perched on the edge of potential chaos. The thought of a marauding band of soldiers arrayed against you sends a chill down your spine, except that spine is already aching from a week of ploughing without so much as a foot of land to show for it. The day before yesterday, the neighbour's house was overrun by a band of brigands looking for a good looting to fill their bellies. Now, every sound makes your heart race. Is that the wind? Or did some rogues sneak over your fence again to pilfer your turnips? Let's go back a moment and remember how all this began. It's not like you woke up one day and thought, today seems like a great day for an invasion. No. This starts with the local lord deciding that it's about time his coffers were filled, and if that means sending you off to battle, so be it. Yes, this is the same lord who thought your wool tunic was plain, and your existence not particularly worthwhile. On that note, your entire community is pulled into the thrill of feudal antics. Every so often, someone announces that the king is preparing to march against their rival king. Therefore, it's time to gather the boys and half the woodshed to make yourself useful as the local meat shield. When the call to arms sounds, it's not like you have a choice. You pick up your pitchfork, that hasn't seen oats in weeks, and rally with the other peasants, most of whom would rather be polishing their wooden shoes than facing off against armoured knights. The shiny suits of armour always looked far more appetising than your raggedy tunics. Walking into battle is like stepping into a medieval circus, but only the clowns are armed to the teeth and don't find you funny. Fear not, though, it's all for the glory of the Lord or something equally dramatic. And by dramatic, I mean a complete gamble on life. The tactics of medieval warfare. Who needs strategy when you have sheer numbers? Marching into battle often resembles a rabble of sheep haphazardly following a lead ram whose only discernible leadership skill is being slightly less terrified than everyone else. If you're lucky, the men with battle axes are just as clueless as your band of merry misfits. And after half a day of hacking at one another with guilt-ridden ferocity, it's usually the side that accidentally trips over their own feet that claims victory and heads back to the village to regale glorious tales of the day they almost died. Now let's address the sacking and looting. You thought you had it tough before. When an invading force rolls into town, pieces out the window faster than you can say, "Where are my food stores?" You watch helplessly as valuable crops you painstakingly nurtured are ripped from the earth and handed out to soldiers who believe loot equals legitimacy. If they burn your hut down, no big deal. Probably just a side effect of the whole live a life of adventure deal that apparently everyone signed up for without reading the fine print. Living in fear becomes alarmingly routine, like skipping breakfast. Oh, but there's the satisfaction that comes from participating in your own community. And by satisfaction, I mean slightly fewer people watching you scrub the dirt off your tunic every Sunday service. During downtime, you exchange stories of that last raid. Thoughts turning from fear to laughter about the ridiculousness of it all, because sometimes you have to laugh to conceal the horror. Remember when old man Harold thought he could take on a night with a broom? Classic. Yet, despite the absurd horror of your daily life, there's something strangely bonding about the sheer absurdity of it all. You might get bloodied and bruised today, but tomorrow's just another round, another battle against a different set of circumstances. Maybe next week you'll dream about cultivating your crops, or even finding that elusive joy in markets, no longer worried that your apples will end up as cannon fodder. War might be a pain in the neck, but it's what you know, and it will forge a camaraderie that ties your lopsided wagon wheel of a community together, no matter how absurd the scenarios you find yourself in. So, as you drift off to sleep this evening, contemplating the cycle of invasions or simply how many children it will take to repopulate your village after that last raid, remember this. While you may face the madness of military life, tomorrow you'll rise and ready yourself for another day, however bonkers it may be. Disputing YOLO was an everyday mantra back then. You quickly learned to hold your breath while walking past the graveyard, just in case you had a bad day. Seriously, if you were lucky enough to reach 30, you were basically a wizened sage, imparting wisdom like a bespectacled old man in a fantasy novel. The life expectancy was shockingly low, generally hugging that comfortable range of 30 to 40 years. One moment, you're trying to survive the weekly market, dodging a rogue chicken, and the next, you're on a first-name basis with the local gravedigger, who seems to be practically running a side hustle. In the Middle Ages, life was a series of unfortunate events strung together by sheer bad luck and poor sanitation. Disease roamed freely like an uninvited guest at a family reunion. The plague, that infamous party crasher, was always lurking nearby, ready to sweep in without an RSVP. You could be happily chewing on a bit of old cheese 1 minute, and 2 days later you'd be reading your obituary. They didn't have Netflix to binge watch when boredom hit, but they sure knew how to keep the death count rolling in. What was even worse, they had no idea what was causing this rapid turnover of the population. You might attempt to ward off the Black Death with a sprig of rosemary, because hey, who needs scientific evidence when you've got a good smell? Or perhaps you were following the advice of some herbalist selling you what could only be described as medicinal whiplash. These charming concoctions could include things like crushed toad, burnt hair, or even a delightful Leech face mask, which might make you look fabulous for all of 3 seconds before you realise they were just sucking the life out of you while you tried to stay alive. Let's not forget food poisoning. Remember that stew you had yesterday? Yeah, not so great. Spoiled food was the dietary cornerstone for many peasants, and a dubious cooking method turned every meal into a gamble. Did you know that some folks would find a dead rat in their barley and think, at least it's extra protein? Gourmet dining was so subjective that you might associate slightly rancid with extra flavourful. Bon appétit, right? Hope you didn't have any prior commitments, because your day was about to take a turn for the stomach. As if that wasn't thrilling enough, childbirth was another wild ride in this amusement park of mortality. The surface-level excitement of a new life came with an urgency that could rival a race against the clock. Women were considered champions of endurance, but unfortunately, they were also burdened with an unfathomable number of risks. Childbirth was a veritable game of Russian roulette. 4 out of 10 women didn't survive. Yes, you heard that right. If given a choice, most would opt to brave the chicken coops over a seasoned midwife. At least the chickens had the decency to not chatter while you were busy crossing your fingers. Fact, if you were lucky enough to pop out a few healthy children, you learned to hold your breath every time your little ones developed a cough. Because let's be real, the nearest physician was most likely out on a pilgrimage, tending to his own ailments while you were left to consider if you'd have to dig a grave next to the neighbour's goat. And yet, despite all odds stacked against your daily existence, people still managed to laugh in the face of calamity. Travelling minstrels spun wild tales of heroes dodging death and villains who tripped over their own swords, bringing joy to the dimmed spirits of medieval life. They knew that laughter was, perhaps ironically, the secret weapon against the grim societal backdrop. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that everyone was in the same rat-infested boat. So, as you pick your way through the muck and mire of medieval life, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of humanity. There was always a flicker of hope, no matter how dim. In this relentless cycle of mortality, you learned the critical lesson that every day was a gift, and half of that gift came from simply avoiding old cheese. So, here's to you, valiant audience, navigating an era where every moment is a saga of survival, humour, and the earnest desire not to be the next resident of the local graveyard. It's a raucous existence filled with more ups and downs than a medieval jousting match, but at the end of the day, you've survived one more day. And that, dear friend, is worth celebrating with a pint of ale, a dusting of dirt, and maybe, just maybe, a dab of rosemary for good measure. You've made it this far, but the truth is every moment is just an adventure painted with a brush of misery, but with a twist. Because despite this chaotic life, people still found ways to love, laugh, and live. If you were to wander the muddy streets of your medieval village, you might think it was a set from a tragic comedy, where everyone else was in on the joke, except you. Picture this. You're dodging the village wheelbarrow of overflowing scraps as you hold steadfast in your hope for a decent meal. It's a balancing act of physical endurance and mental acrobatics, with humour swirling around like that unidentifiable smell trailing from the butcher shop. Speaking of humour, let's dig into the local comedian, your neighbour, Old Bert. A man whose life mantra seems to be, if you can't laugh at your misfortunes, what's the point? He's got an uncanny knack for turning even the direst plagues into tales so outrageous, you'd swear you were listening to a stand-up routine rather than the grim news of imminent illness. Why did the plague-ridden chicken cross the road, he asks, with a glint of mischief in his eye. To make sure the doctor would be too preoccupied with its feathers to notice it was sick. As the punchline hangs in the air, even the sombre-faced villager gives a chuckle, because laughter becomes a brief escape from the realities of straw mattresses, squirrel stew, and the pox. So, how do we cope? Well, watch your back and keep your wits about you, because friendship is your best defence against the relentless grip of hopelessness. Enter a circle of local peasants, clutching their mugs of low-grade ale like they're about to toast the devil himself. Challenges don't just bring despair, they bring camaraderie. To surviving another day, you all rally. Each toast is accompanied by the collective spirit of resilience, shared hardships, and the smoky scent of roasted rat from the tavern kitchen. Yes, even the rats become part of the community, standing in solidarity with you. As night falls, your hut transforms into a hub of human warmth, or perhaps it's just the scent of your communal stew mingling with that oddly comforting aroma of unwashed wool. Gathered by the flickering light of your one burnt-out candle, Spirits seem to rise despite the flies buzzing overhead. You tell tales that mix the absurd and the fearsome, inevitably shared as moral lessons wrapped in laughter. Did you hear about Farmer John, caught talking to his crops like they could hear him? But let me tell you, the next morning he swore they were listening. Too bad he forgot to water them. Let's not ignore the romantic side of life in the midst of all that distress. Love, like a tenacious weed, finds a way to root itself in bleak gardens. You too are not immune. Despite the constant threat of the plague, the idea of courtship infiltrates your mind like an unwelcome guest, refusing to vacate. Amidst alleys filled with laughter and the lingering stench of goat dung, you find yourself falling for your neighbour, Edith, a spirited woman whose archery skills rival those of the finest knights. Your courtship consists of stolen glances shared over pots of pottage and discussions of how to ward off the next outbreak of whatever that was giving half the village the sniffles. Romantic, isn't it? Who needs flowers when everyone's already immersed in the philosophy of pest management? Meanwhile, let's not forget about the festivities. Ah yes, those glorious occasions where people gather to celebrate the small triumphs of surviving another week. They're signalled by drunken singing and a little too much enthusiasm as the townsfolk dance around a bonfire, which is more like a flimsy flickering light surrounded by a wall of dead grass. It's not a party without some uncontrolled debates, you quickly learn. Typically they're ignited by a simple comment about the weather or Uncle Fergus's pants. Throw in a few rounds of ale, and suddenly you have a rowdy discussion about whether sheep have feelings. But here's the kicker. Amidst the revelry lies a fabric woven with memories that acts like a temporary shield against despair. So there you are, suspended between moments of utter chaos and fleeting joy. In the Middle Ages, historical misery truly fosters connectivity. It's the level of camaraderie you can't simply chalk up to shared experiences. It's the pulse of life. It's a humbling reminder that even when you're knee-deep in muck, you'd make a splendid clown in this tragic circus, learning to survive with humour, warmth, and a mixture of absurdity and love. This, my friends, is the medieval adventure you never signed up for, but one that will stay with you through thick and thin. Whether it's a bad batch of gruel or an unexpected plague knocking at your door. So continue to laugh, love, and find the small moments of joy, even when the world appears determined to drown you in historical misery.